I'm Alex Russell, and I'm an engineer on the Chrome team, but I'm also tech lead for a project that you might never have heard of called Fizz. And today, I don't want to necessarily talk about what we've built so much as why we built it and how we're approaching the next set of things that we're going to build. But I think that a little bit of background is in order. So yesterday, we all heard about how Facebook, which famously told the world that HTML5 was a huge mistake, has come back and enabled push notifications on their mobile website to huge effect. They're pushing an enormous number of messages, and Owen Campbell-Moore, who's here today, presented along with Facebook engineers at their at-scale conference just a couple of months ago, talking about why being mobile doesn't necessarily mean just making native apps. We've seen huge uptake from a ton of different websites, including things like Product Hunt, which traditionally focus on native applications. Push notifications, as you saw yesterday, are changing businesses. We've just published a case study about Beyond the Rack on the developers.google.com/web website, which talks about these numbers in more depth. But the important part to understand here is that this is something that isn't just about Facebook. This isn't just about a couple of head apps. This is about major changes to many businesses. And just a couple of days ago, Flipkart, which also famously went native only in the last year, just relaunched an incredible new experience on the web for mobile devices only. And this thing really works. If you haven't tried it out, get out your Android, go to flipkart.com, try it out, and then take your phone offline. It'll still work. Your last searches will still show up. You can get push notifications from it. It's immersive. It adds to the home screen. It's brilliant. And we saw that we've also shipped installability to the home screen for many applications. This is Paul Kinlan's Air Horner app, which you can use to annoy all of your friends. Highly recommended. It's brilliant. Uses web audio to create an air horn. I won't do it for you now, but you can do it for yourself later. Using HTML5 manifests, and this is also taking off. We've got data that says that this is something that real websites are using to improve the engagement with their users. You've also seen that we've done even more there. Munir, who is in the audience today, I think, has been working very hard to make sure that we can take significantly better advantage of the data that's in those manifests to add brilliant splash screens, which Flipkart and applications like the Voice Memos app that Paul Lewis built can really give you an engaging end-to-end experience where when you launch this application from the home screen, it really feels like it belongs. Not only is it a top-level item in your task switcher, but it really launches and feels like you're in an app the whole time. So yes, as you saw yesterday, it's actually happening. We're actually shipping all of this stuff. Rick wasn't wrong. We are actually making a huge difference in real websites. This talk isn't about that. It's about how we got there. We started this journey not early this year when we shipped service workers, not in 2013 when we started building service workers for real, not in 2012 when we started designing service workers for real, but we started this journey a long, long time ago. And it's a huge team. This is an eye chart. I won't ask you to read it all. But I think it's worth going back over some of the history here to understand how we have gotten to a place where all those features added up together, and how, more importantly, if you are working on a new thing, you can follow the same path. Because we've shipped an enormous number of features in the last year that look like they just came out of nowhere. And if you didn't know they were adding up to something, you wouldn't expect them to fit together. So step back with me a little bit in time to the dark days of 2006, when nothing on the web worked offline. In 2006, you could make a single-page application for your desktop browser, like Gmail or like Google Maps, and it could be incredibly immersive. It could do a lot of things that people hadn't expected browsers to do until then. Ajax was a new word. Google was stretching the limits of what was possible inside the browser, and it was changing expectations about what the web could be. We actually were in a place where developers had been crying out for the ability to do something interesting, to do something new, to do something that they could do in native applications, but they couldn't do on the web yet. And it was finally becoming possible. But it couldn't work offline. There's a huge hole in the story. So, the Google Gears team was started. There were other projects at the same time. I was actually at a company, a little tiny consulting company, where we were working on an alternative to this. Come to find out later from the Gears team that they were working on it. Of course, it was Google. They were funded. They had a team of people much smarter than us. So they were able to actually go make it go. So Gears started in about 2006, and Annie Sullivan, who's around here someplace, who's now working on performance, was part of one of the initial teams that was building applications on top of Google Gears. They were building offline versions of Google Mail, of Google Docs and spreadsheets. They were building applications that actually worked with this technology. They were dog fooding. It was brilliant. It was a wonderful strategy. And then it didn't work. We got Gears, and it was really painful. And then we got App Cache, and it was really painful. And they had the exact same design features. So how do we go from that to this, where we've just shipped a ton of stuff that's actually making a real-world difference in end users' lives? Things that developers actually want and are starting to use almost as soon as we launch them. Like, keep in mind that we've been working on service workers for about 3 years now, but we just launched them in January with Chrome 40. And now they're in Opera, they're soon to be in Firefox. We've just launched this stuff, and we're seeing enormous uptake. So how do we get from there to here? I submit that it's a very simple plan, and it's one that you can use too. First, you have to listen. You have to go find developers who have a problem. Trust me, they have a problem. If you talk to a web developer, and you should, or better yet, become a web developer yourself, you will find out that there is a problem with the web platform. You don't know what it is yet. That's okay. You're going to find out. Something is going to be painful. When you start building for the web, some of what you hit will be your fault. Don't assume that it all is, though. As someone who works on the web platform, who actually works on improving the platform, listen to yourself. Listen to what's painful. If you don't trust yourself to remember it later, write it down, and then review those notes later. Next, find that constituency and collaborate with them. Work with them to understand what might work, what might solve their problem. And then lastly, don't stop there. Keep at it. Keep listening. Keep iterating. There are lots of specific technical details about how to approach the process and about how to approach the API design that will enable you to do this better, and I'll talk about a few of them in a moment. But the really, really, really important part of this talk is that you take this plan with you. Listen, collaborate, repeat. Do that, and it's the fast path to success. So Dion Elmer, who's going to kill me if he sees me using this slide, is here presenting Google Gears. Right? I just talked about how App Cache was an enormous failure, about how Google Gears had basically exactly the same design. What happened there? We built Gears. Gears was pretty good. It was an early stab at it. We didn't have necessarily the ability to go influence major open source browsers. The Blink team didn't exist. We didn't have Chrome. Firefox was the one thing that you could work on, but it didn't necessarily have huge penetration in the market. So Gears left around this problem by doing this sort of dirty vtable patching that we wound up doing for Chrome Frame as well. But it enabled us to ship new ideas into the platform in a very fast way. Workers, WebSQL, or something like WebSQL, geolocation, which I don't know if anyone remembers that Gears was where geolocation came from, but also what was then called the local server, which, funny enough, didn't actually have a server that you could program. It was local, of course, but it was just a list of files that you downloaded, a JSON manifest of files that were downloaded, and then when you were offline would be served back to you. We built applications. Google built applications using this technology. So the Docs team and the Gmail team put in major efforts to use Google Gears to build applications on top of it to try to understand how we could, on the one hand, improve the user experience so we didn't have this gaping hole in the capability of the platform that developers really didn't like, on the other hand, so that we could learn from it. And then we didn't. We didn't learn from it. How did this happen? How did we go from having Google Gears, where we had in-house expertise on both the development side of the platform and the development side of the applications, and then not learn from it? Well, it turns out that listen, collaborate, and repeat requires something that's really hard for a lot of us, which is to understand that we don't know the answer. I'll be the very first to admit that I want to know the answer. I want to know the answer so badly that very frequently I want to think I know the answer before I do. This is human. This is just being human. The most important part of the process that we didn't do with AppCache is to listen. We didn't go find a constituency. We thought we knew the answer. We thought we had an answer that was good enough, and then we didn't go and actively seek out countervailing wisdom. It was there. Eric Arvidsson would have told you. Annie Sullivan would have told you that Gears was terrible to develop for. And in fact, the feedback that they had, which was that it was impossible to debug, it was very difficult to understand when something was going wrong, or how to configure it to make it work well, those were the exact same pieces of feedback that were leveled against the application cache design, which we eventually shipped a new implementation of, right? Think about it this way. We did multiple sets of multi-year implementation and iterations on these technologies, and we didn't bother to learn. This is a cautionary tale that repeats everywhere in the web platform. This isn't about the people who worked on AppCache or designed AppCache. They didn't do it wrong. They just did what everybody else was doing, and what in many areas we may still be doing, which is to think that we know the answer because we have an existence proof that our first version did something positive. It's the lack of collaboration and repeating that gets us to the point where you can go from listening once to groupthink. It's very easy to go from listening to groupthink. So what did we do differently to get to service workers, to get to manifests, to get to home screen? How did we actually get to a place where we did this? So we went and we listened to web developers, and it turns out they're happy to tell you all about their problems. So I should note here very quickly that we had a lot of help. Andrew Betts at the Financial Times, who's the organizer of EdgeConf, was incredibly keyed into the problem of trying to build a high-fidelity application on the mobile web. The Financial Times doesn't have a native app. They have a website. And in 2012, it was incredibly clear to them, having tried to build something that worked offline, that AppCache wasn't good enough. Between implementation quality issues and between the API, it wasn't enough. Jake Archibald had just succeeded building an application offline using AppCache, and he wrote the application cache as a douchebag article. So when success hurts that much, it may not be worth succeeding. So there was a meeting in London, and Andrew got a bunch of people together. Platform developers like me, web developers like Jake and his team, the Financial Times team, and folks from major sites like Facebook, and put everyone in a room, including with standards people, and said, this isn't working. What isn't working? And that simple question of, hey, everybody, this isn't working, what isn't working, in a room with diverse enough experience is what got us to a place where we understood by the end of that day that we had to do something fundamentally different. I came away from that day understanding that we thought we knew better and we were wrong. This generalized pretty well. We had taken this extensibility view with web components. We'd said, we don't actually know which components you need. HTML doesn't have all the answers yet. It doesn't have all the tags that you're going to need to make a high-class application, but we can figure it out together if we give you the power to extend the platform. Turned out that this was true in every other area too. We could ask developers what they needed, and if we gave them enough power to build them for themselves, we could go learn from what they built to go figure out what we should actually bake into the platform as a high-level feature in the future. Okay, so we learned that web developers are trying to compete with native applications on polish and user experience. Now, it's very easy in this moment, and I catch myself doing this sometimes, and I think a lot of us do, to suggest that web developers shouldn't be pushing our platform as hard as they do. It's really easy to say, well, don't do that, right? That's really, really slow. This thing hurts a lot. You'll hear this from web developers when you talk to them. They'll say, why can't I do X? And you'll say, do you really need to do that? It's an easy first pass filter to let you end the conversation. Don't. Don't end the conversation. They don't know how to express to you, as a feature developer, what it is that they need. And so you need to be willing to work with them to understand that they're fumbling through language because they don't understand the internals of Blink. They don't understand the internals of the web platform. They may not necessarily understand the full details of the security model or our privacy constraints or any of the things that cause us to want to say no. That's okay. Walk with them for a little bit, right? Stick with it. Keep asking questions. Keep asking, why isn't it working? What is it that you're actually trying to get done here? What is it that you need to do, and why can't you do it? In some cases, the answer is, well, I can do it in browser X, but I can't do it in browsers Y. At which point, you're waiting on the future to arrive. That's tough. It's a really hard spot to be in. Okay, there may not be a lot you can do, except to try to accelerate adoption. That's something you can do. There are real strategies that we can employ to do that, and I'm happy to talk to you about them later. But in the cases where it's really a capability problem, we can walk with them a bit and figure out more. So we learned that web developers are trying to compete with native apps on polish and user experience, but they're trying to do it from a disadvantaged UI position. Until very recently, it hasn't been possible to be in all of the UI surfaces that users care about. You couldn't be in the launcher. You couldn't be in the dock. You couldn't be in a task switcher. You couldn't be a first-class thing. You couldn't escape out of a tab. And when we talked to developers, they desperately wanted to do exactly this. And in fact, there's just so much evidence laying around when you start looking. When you actually start asking that inquisitive set of questions about what is it you're trying to do, you'll see Cordova. You'll see huge use of tools which route around us, which route around our inability to deliver solutions to their problems. Developers will eventually go take the situation in their hands. This is another moment where it's very simple to say, oh, well, you have an answer. Great. Well, we also know from things like Cordova that it doesn't work very well because the application model of native applications doesn't work well in terms of distribution. People want to be on the web because we have a superpower, and that superpower is the URL. It's the link. You can hand someone a link and run the app. Right? This is why we're in this room. This is why I have a job working on a browser. It's why you have a job working on a browser. It's because the critical power of URLs is so fundamental to making it possible to share experiences with people around you that no other platform has ever come close. No other platform has enabled mobile code to be safe, to be portable, and to be experienced by everyone on almost any device. Nothing else does this. So we've won this battle, and we're still winning it. It turns out that native applications still covet the ability to be linkable, roughly, to be clickable, to be runnable as soon as you tap a link. That's a thing that we've got that nobody else has. And so developers don't want to give this up, but they want all the other stuff too. So starting from that position, it's easy to understand now that there's a thing that we could do to close this gap. So working backwards, we spend a lot of time talking about what developers want, but then we have to sort of reconcile it with what users need, right? So users expect applications, which is what developers are trying to provide, to be in the home screen, to be on the launcher, to be in the task switcher. And they want to be in the notification center. They want to be able to be in all the bits of top-level UI surface area. This stuff was screaming out at us when we started to look, when we started to ask, what is it that you're trying to do? And part of the implicit long-term capability that users expect is that when we talk to them, that they expect things that are in these privileged UI surface areas to work offline, just because that's what native applications also do. This got us to a place where we built something roughly that we're calling progressive web apps. This is just the ability to be on the home screen, to be in the task switcher, to be, not necessarily in the same way, but also to be in the notification tray. And it's all driven through open web technology. These applications aren't native apps. They aren't a fork of the web. They're not web technology in a different package. They're actually things that run at URLs. They start in a tab, and then they get better. They lean on our superpower of being a clickable, linkable thing, and then they turn you into applications. We got there by listening to what they need, what developers and users wanted, and then we worked back from what's the web that we've got, and how can we evolve it to get you to where you want to go. This is why this eye chart of features all make sense together. If you just took this list of features and you tried to think about them in isolation and said, well, what does the permissions API have to do with service workers? What in the heck does font access have to do with a splash screen? These things seem entirely unrelated to each other. But when you stop and listen to what developers need and what users expect, you can work backwards and say, what are the pieces of this picture that are missing, and then deliver those. This is what gets us to a successful project versus a feature that's going to die on the vine. When we work with teams now to try to get them through the process of building a new feature on the platform, the question that we ask is, how do you know that this is the right thing? How do you know that the feature that you're building is the right thing? And the way that we try to satisfy that question is to do the listen, collaborate, and repeat process over and over and over again. And that's what's gotten us to this point. So, I don't want to just talk about how we succeeded. I want to talk about where we aren't yet succeeding. So we're not done. The stuff that we've shipped already, progressive apps, push notifications, which by the way are being used by thousands of sites and pushing a number of messages, which I wish I could quote. It's so high. But when we give developers new stuff, if we're talking to them, we'll hear about the next thing. So we're doing that, or we're trying. Maybe we're going to do better in the future. I hope we'll do better in the future. But the thing that has separated our approach now from what's happened in the past is that we're definitely making it a real effort to go out and work with end developers to listen to them, to make sure that what we're delivering is what is actually meeting their needs. So we've given people the ability to work offline, to have a presence in the home screen, but now they're telling us things like, gosh, this is amazing, but if I make a photo application, I really want to just be able to upload those in the background when the user takes it, whenever that happens, because I don't want them to have to be sitting there watching my app and watch a progress bar. Native apps don't have to do that. Why should I? So we're building background sync. This is how background sync fits in, right? Developers and users expect an experience, and we can deliver it, but we're missing a feature. We're missing a capability. Now it's a thing that we can do that's driven by actual needs. We're going out and we're listening to needs. In the same way, we're finding out that a whole class of applications need to never lose data. People don't expect the web's eviction model when you're thinking about something that's on the home screen, when you're thinking about something that's a first-class application inside the runtime. So we need to figure out a way to let users say, I bless this application to be like a real application in terms of its durability for storage. This is coming. We're hearing that developers expect to be able to control devices, to talk to more hardware than we've ever allowed them to speak to in the past. And so there's a team now that's building a constrained version of USB connections for the web. Talk to Jeff Yaskin about it later. And there's a team that's building a version of access to USB devices for the web. We're seeing similar efforts in other places for things like NFC, where developers are saying, this is amazing. This thing is almost exactly what I need to be an application, except for this one thing. Having this conversation and highlighting what it is that developers need to go meet user expectations is how we're approaching more of these problems. We've been talking to teams that say, this is amazing. This is incredible. We really want this, except we can't ship our application. It can't really compete unless we have something like local font access. We can't build a professional design tool until we have local font access. So we're building local font access. We're talking to developers and they're saying, this is amazing. I love these notifications, except I want to be able to take actions from the notifications. So we're iterating on notifications to add action buttons. At this point, when we have this data in hand and we have people using these things and providing reports to us about what the delta is between where they are and what they need to really compete, it's really easy to make the case. In fact, we don't have to make the case just to ourselves. We need to satisfy ourselves that these are really needs that are important, but we also have to satisfy a bunch of other people too, because we can't be the only ones to ship this, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And we're also talking to folks who are saying, this is wonderful. I need to be able to do this, but I also need to be able to have finer grained control over some of the bits of the API service areas that you've already given me, things like get user media or geolocation. And then we're hearing a lot that as we iterate with folks, they want to iterate more with us. We're finding out that we need to be able to deliver things to work with them faster. And so Jason Chase and that team's work on the experimental framework is hopefully going to allow us to try out more things faster and listen and iterate more quickly, more iteratively. So that's kind of the process. That's the process at the highest level I can possibly describe it, that listen, collaborate, and repeat process. But there are things that we actually have to do between having a good idea, validating that it's worthwhile to end developers and end users, and then actually going and turning it into an API. So we've come up with a couple of high-level things that guide our thinking. The first of them is obvious when you start thinking about building that constituency, which is that you have to get out of the bubble of talking just to your peers inside Chromium or Blink. You have to go talk to end developers. You have to go get outside of the C++ world and into the web developer world. You may not be comfortable doing this. I guarantee that you have teammates who are more comfortable or who can talk to your developer relations and outreach folks who can help gather this data for you. Today, we don't do a very good job at collecting evidence about the problems that developers have. I'd submit that this is actually a large-scale problem that we have not yet tackled. We have not cracked this nut. Our approaches so far are still very manual. They're still very hands-on. It would be better if we could automate more of this, and I'm hopeful that we'll do more of that in the future. And this isn't just us. Every browser team has this problem. No one's doing yet a good job of doing science about the web and what it needs. We've decided that in every moment, we should attempt to be as webby as possible. We should start from where we are and not start from where we want to be. If you start from where you want to be, it's easy to work backwards the wrong way and get to something like Cordova, or get to something like Windows applications, or get to something like BlackBerry WebStorm, or get to something like Adobe Air. You can say, I want to use this web technology, and I want to be able to do these things, and move from there to a deliverable that moves you off the web, and then you've lost your superpower. So start with the superpower, and then figure out how to extend it out to encompass the things that you need to be able to do in the future. Next, admit technically that you don't know what you don't know. It's easy to admit that you don't know what you don't know about user needs, but it's harder to admit that you don't know what you don't know about API design. We see this over and over and over again. We want to deliver the high-level feature because it's the thing that insulates us from developers making a mess in our backyard. It's the thing that keeps us from having to consider developers doing it all wrong. It keeps us from having to think hard about the layering and extensibility of the platform. But we need to resist this temptation. We have to work backwards from our ignorance and say, we're going to provide you a low-level API to the extent that we can so that we'll learn from you more frequently and more iteratively. Enabling yourself to iterate is also an API design lesson. This is what extensibility has taught us, and it's what extensibility is continuing to deliver to us. We're getting new API suggestions directly from the community of people who are adopting service workers, who are adopting the cache APIs, who are adopting push notifications, folks who are building these applications that we're really excited to see finally arriving on the web. We're also keen to make sure that almost all of the APIs are asynchronous. This is a lesson that we've learned the hard way. Again, we've seen how to do it wrong, and we're trying to do it right. So providing asynchronous entry points to browser-specific UI is always a good idea. It gives us, as browser vendors, the ability to iterate on that UI over time, and it gives us, as the broader community of browsers, the ability to have different opinions about what that UI should be. It lets us change our mind. Preserving the ability to change our mind is an important aspect of designing APIs that are going to scale. And then, of course, iteration. So the next question, of course, on everyone's mind is, that sounds great. Also, how the heck do I sell this through the standards process? I've heard that it's scary. I don't want to do it. Who can I get to go write a spec for me? This is doing it wrong. Thinking about the question that way kind of tries to absolve you of the responsibility to build momentum for your feature. If you think that having a specification and having a written down design is what gets you through the standards process, you might be right. But that's not what gets you to the right thing. If your goal is to build the right thing, then you need to have momentum that comes from end developers telling you that it's the right thing and then saying your design is finally correct. That's what gets you through the standards process with low friction. Having end users beating down your door saying, why aren't you shipping this? This is what I want, is exactly the proof point. And so you can't start big, you can't convince everyone up front, and that's okay. But you can convince that small community of people that you've started to talk to early on about your feature, about the problem that they have, and ask them, Is this thing going to solve your problem? So when we're talking about the standards process, we've come to a couple of understandings. The first is that you need to identify the problem first. Build a coalition of people who are willing to work with you, who know that they have got the problem and are willing to understand that you're willing to try to help them solve it, but on a long time scale. You have to do the design in public. That doesn't mean writing a spec. It means doing design. Don't write specs. Write explainers. Write down how someone will use your design. Don't write down what the design is. Does that make sense? Focus on the user need at every moment until the last moment when you have to write it down. Next, grow the circle. Find more people who can help you validate your idea. Do this by implementing. Do this by working through the experimental framework. Do this by shipping things behind a flag. Get as much feedback as you can as early on and get as many iterations in to make sure that you've built the right thing to help you validate that it's actually going to work in the wild. Ship the minimum amount that you possibly can, and then at the very last moment, once you've finally got a spec, because you had to have a spec to actually ship, once you've got an explainer, once you've got a developer community, standardization happens. It's a natural outgrowth of having a thing that's successful. Standardization is the end result, it's not the goal. Does that make sense? So I want you today to steal this process. You may not work on one of the teams that's associated with the Fizz project inside of the Chrome team, but this is a project that has pioneered a process that you can absolutely use for yourself. And I want you to do this. If you need help, I want you to come talk to me, or come talk to Owen, or come talk to Alex Komaroske. We would love to talk with you about how we've applied these basic lessons through the set of features that I just talked about and showed you. I'm happy to take questions now or later today. Thanks again for your time. Questions?
Sorry, excuse me.
Hello. So one thing that came up was when we talked with some of the web developers, when they talked about why they spend more time building native apps versus mobile web apps, is that like app stores for native apps do reward them. When they use a new API, they get featured, and they get more users. Is there anything we can do for the web?
Yeah, so this is a very detailed and complicated question to answer. But the question is, roughly, developers have an incentive in the App Store ecosystem. Please help me understand if I'm paraphrasing this incorrectly. Developers have an incentive in the App Store ecosystem to build new things that use new APIs that platform vendors are trying to push, because that's how you get featured, and getting featured is how you get your app installed and used. This is broken, right? This again comes back to leaning on our superpower. App stores are hit machines, and building native apps is taking a lottery ticket. It's not a sustainable way to build a business unless you happen to be at the very head end of a particular ecosystem. And so when we talk to developers who don't have one of the top 2 or 3 applications in any category, or we talk to people who are trying to make a business as young or small companies, what we frequently see is that eventually they come back to the web. The developer economics survey calls most of these developers folks who are under the developer poverty line, and that's most developers who are trying to make money on apps in the native ecosystems today, because App Store discovery doesn't work. The web's discovery mechanism works. URLs are how things get shared, and in fact, URLs are how things get shared about native applications too. There's a booming trade in application add install banners, and that's all driven because app stores aren't able to find things that users want. So it's a problem that we legitimately got because users are now trained to understand to go to app stores, but it's not a problem that we can solve through the front door by simply putting our applications inside of app stores. We can help people have their applications become discoverable over time by making the web better, making it an easier way to get into the application experience in the first place. I'm happy to talk about this at length offline. Anything else? I know we're running out of time. Thanks, everyone.